The first point to make about the Holocaust is that it did not spring full-blown from the mind of Adolf Hitler, or even from the state of the German soul in 1933. Its roots go back well before the beginning of this course. Anti-Semitism had a long and virulent history in the West. During the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, the Church preached that the Jews had sinned doubly by refusing to follow Christ and by killing him. Therefore, they should be converted forcibly if necessary. If they refused conversion, then they should be humiliated and made to wear distinctive clothing or symbols. Martin Luther's On the Jews and Their Lies perpetuated these ideas among the Protestant community, especially in Germany. The Church did not officially encourage the killing of Jews, but many people seem to have assumed that it did so. In popular European folklore, Jews consorted with the devil, abducting and sacrificing Christian children in their religious observances, the blood libel. States often simply expelled Jews, for example, England in the 13th century, France in the 14th century, and Spain in the 15th century. Where Jews were not expelled, they were often banned from certain professions and required to live in ghettos. Because they were not subject to the Church's ban on usury, they often played an important part in the economic life of medieval and Renaissance cities. And this could lead to wealth for Jews, but also to profound jealousy and resentment among Christians. This often led in turn to popular violence against Jews. At the beginning of the 20th century, anti-Semitism was considered a perfectly respectable attitude in many circles. It's true that Jews had been emancipated and granted full civil rights in most European countries during the 19th century, but their newfound prominence was combined with old stereotypes to give new life to anti-Semitism. Thus, the anti-Semitism that Hitler picked up on the streets of Vienna was neither new nor exclusively German. Now, Hitler gave it a new, more effective voice. He did so by linking it to German nationalism and the famous stab-in-the-back charge that Jewish bankers had plotted Germany's downfall during World War I. He also draped it in racial pseudoscience. Hitler was not alone in noticing that many of the leaders of the successful communist revolution in Russia were Jews, and members of the middle class on both sides of the Atlantic frequently associated Judaism and communism. An American example is Henry Ford, who believed that the international Jew was the greatest threat to the Anglo-Saxon race. In fact, there were only about 600,000 Jews in Germany, about 1% of the population in 1933. Immediately upon taking power, the Nazis encouraged anti-Semitic terror. On the 1st of April 1933, the government announced a boycott of Jewish businesses. On the 7th of April, Jews were formally excluded from the civil service jobs. In 1934, the government imposed strict quotas on Jews at universities. And in 1935, the Nuremberg laws deprived Jews of German citizenship and forbade them to marry non-Jews. In 1938, Jews were banned from the practice of medicine and law and forced to register their property with the government, later confiscated and sold to Aryans. On the 9th of November 1938, the murder of a German diplomat in Paris by a Polish Jew led to a wave of spontaneous riots against Jews and Jewish property, known as Kristallnacht. Henceforward, for their protection, Jews were forced to live in ghettos and wear Stars of David. Now, it was at this point that many Jews and their persecuted groups decided that there was no life left for them in Germany. In fact, 66% of Jews had left the country by 1938. 60% of those who stayed behind had already lost their jobs. Immigration was difficult, in part because other nations had very strict quotas on the number of Jewish refugees they would accept. Once the war started, the United States allowed only 21,000 refugees into the country from 1941 to 1944. Now, for those who failed to make it out of Germany or were living in countries soon to be absorbed into the Third Reich, the odds were not good. Soon after the start of the war in 1939, German leaders began to contemplate a final solution to the Jewish problem in Germany and the conquered territories. Now, at first, they considered deportation to reservations in conquered territories. However, after Hitler's invasion of Russia in the spring of 1941, mobile SS units called Einsatzgruppen, or action squads, were ordered to shoot Russian Jews in front of mass graves dug by the Jews themselves. The killings were soon extended to Jews in Poland and Serbia. By the spring of 1942, Jews in slave labor camps began to be exterminated, accounting for 1 million dead. Now, in 1941, Hitler decided on the final solution, that is, the extermination of all Jews and other inferior groups in the conquered nations. Slavs were to be enslaved. Under the supervision of Adolf Eichmann, Jews and other undesirable groups were rounded up by the SS or the cooperative regimes of conquered nations. Countries allied with Germany, including Italy and Hungary, were also supposed to round up their Jews, but they did so only sporadically. There were Jewish resistance movements, generally not supported by local non-Jewish populations. In Belgium, France, and Germany, some clergy protested, and Jews received assistance to flee or hide in the Netherlands, Norway, and Denmark. Israel has recognized some 18,000 righteous among the nations who assisted Jews, including the Swedish diplomat Raoul Wallenberg, Japanese diplomat Shiuni Sugihara, and German industrialist Oskar Schindler. Now, deportation happened in stages. First, Jews were sent to ghettos. Then the ghettos were cleared out. In some cases, the Jewish leadership of the ghetto knew what was happening, and they gave up some among them to save others. Also sent to the camps were political opponents and clergy who preached against the deportation: communists, Jehovah's Witnesses, gypsies, German male homosexuals, the mentally retarded, and those with severe illnesses. They were sent by railcar to camps in Germany: Belsen, Buchenwald, Dachau, and Poland, Sobibor, Treblinka, Auschwitz-Birkenau. Now, in addition to the death camps, many German companies used slave labor to keep German industry going. Now, concentration camps had actually been created as early as 1933 to detain political prisoners and deter political opposition. Now, upon disembarking from the train, a German officer determined an individual's immediate fate. The elderly and children were exterminated immediately, and the young and the able-bodied were separated by sex and sent to work for the German war machine. Clothing and rations were inadequate, and those who grew sick or weak were generally put to death. Now, at first, the Germans used firing squads, but this was slow and cumbersome. In the fall of 1942, they introduced cyanide gas produced from Zyklon B, a pesticide. Using specially constructed gas chambers, masquerading as showers, the commanders of Auschwitz could murder 6,000 persons a day. Now, by liberation in 1945, at least 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million children, 3.5 million Soviet soldiers, and 1.5 million Poles had been slaughtered. The US and UK intelligence services knew what was happening by 1941. There was some reluctance in government circles to believe in the slaughter, but even after it became obvious, for allegedly strategic reasons, the Allies refused to bomb the rail lines. Now, as we know, there are those in our society who would deny that the Holocaust occurred. In fact, the sheer weight of evidence as to the existence and scale of the Holocaust is monumental. The Nazis were exceptional record keepers. The Einsatzgruppen, for example, made regular reports to Hitler. We also have eyewitness accounts of victims and survivors, including the Diary of Anne Frank and Elie Wiesel's Night. We have the eyewitness accounts of Allied soldiers who liberated the camps in 1945 and have never forgotten the sickening sights and smells. Finally, we have the newsreel footage shot at the time, and this is especially important because, as you know, the generation of World War II and the Holocaust is dying off, and soon no one will be alive to bear eyewitness. Now, the historical record is mountainous and clear as to what happened. At least 11 million people died, and to deny this fact or minimize it is to be either a villain or a fool. Now, the denial of the uniqueness of the Holocaust is more subtle and challenging. It is true, of course, that human beings have been subject to mass brutality before and since the Führerwunsch, or the Führer's Wish, of 1941. In this course alone, we've seen civilizations fail in the Inquisition, the 30 Years' War, the Atlantic slave trade, the gradual near extinction of the American Indians, the Armenian genocide of 1915, and Stalin's purges and the purblind stupidity that caused repeated mass starvation in the Soviet Union. Now, after the Holocaust, we've witnessed the Japanese rape of Nanking, the vicious regime of Pol Pot in Cambodia, 1,000 atrocities perpetuated in the Middle East, ethnic cleansing in Croatia, Krajina, Bosnia, and Kosovo, the Rwandan genocide of 1994, the Darfur genocide at the turn of the 21st century, international terrorism, and so on and so on. What is unique about the Holocaust, however, is that never before had an entire people, including its children, been earmarked for systematic extermination, regardless of citizenship, by a national government. The obvious question is, why did the Holocaust happen? And why did the nation of Beethoven and Brahms, Goethe and Schiller, Kant and Hegel opt to turn the world into a charnel house? Now, some might say that the answer can be found in those figures from German history that I didn't cite: Martin Luther, Richard Wagner, Friedrich Nietzsche, nationalists and anti-Semites all. But every culture has great figures with great flaws and blind spots. Now, I can't fully explain the Holocaust, but I do know that civilization is fragile. We've seen it fail repeatedly in this course. It fails because it's not so durable as a building or a book, fragile as those things are. Civilization is an act and a conscious choice that we make, or do not make, every day. That choice is made in the ways in which we treat others, especially those who are different from ourselves. In other words, the Holocaust did not begin in a pulpit or a podium. It began at the dinner table, in the line waiting for the bus, and what people taught their children in the home and in the classroom. Which means that civilization is always being fostered or stifled, always in need of defense, and that is a lesson for us all. Now, the intelligent historiography on the Holocaust, as opposed to that which questions its existence, has argued recently about the responsibility of the German people. In 1945 and subsequently, many Germans claimed that they had no idea what was happening. In 1996, Daniel John Goldhagen argued in Hitler's Willing Executioners that a wide swath of the German people had to have known. Many had to have participated willingly, even enthusiastically, in the process of mass murder on such a grand scale. Against this, it might be pointed out that missing neighbors would be most noticeable in cities. Country folk who did not live near the camps might never have known. Other countries also participated, often willingly. And we might deduce that many Germans suspected that something was going on, but may not have wanted to know the whole truth. they had jobs, and could put food on their table again, largely because Hitler was rearming.